far we've come as a democracy, particularly along the respect for human rights. South Africa, of course, having its history, a turbulent history with human rights, but also having a progressive history of having the most advanced constitution in the world. This conference will really delve into the aspect of human rights, how far we have come, and what more we need to do to deepen a human rights culture.
And in election-related news, PAC President Mzwanele Nyonso has distanced the party from claims that it will join hands with Al-Jamaa in the May 29 election. Nyonso accuses Al-Jamaa leader Hanif Hendricks of lying, saying the PAC leaders are in his party's election list for the 2024 polls. Last week, at the launch of the Al-Jamaa manifesto, Hendricks recognized some PAC members led by Narias Muloto, who also said they will support the Al-Jamaa at the polls. But Nyonso accuses Hendricks of associating himself with a clique of discredited former PAC members who have lost disputes of leadership in several courts. The PAC has also threatened to take appropriate steps with regulatory bodies to deal with the matter. Political analyst Zakhele Ndlovu has condemned the alleged attack on some ANC members at a government event in Kwaqeza in Nongoma, northern KwaZulu-Natal at the weekend. The alleged attack follows political tensions that played out between provincial ANC leader Siboniso Duma and AmaZulu traditional Prime Minister Reverend Thulasizwe Buthelezi at the event. Ndlovu says what happened was uncalled for and could have been avoided. He says he hopes that this attack will not see tensions between the two parties escalating further.
Well, it has already happened. There were people who were attacked after what ensued between Mr. Duma and Mr. Buthelezi. So let's just hope we're not going to see tensions rising and people being attacked. Let's hope that going forward, people are going to exercise restraint and behave in a manner that is in line with the laws of the country.
The DA in the Nelson Mandela Bay has expressed concern at the high crime rate in the city. This after a global report ranked the city as the most dangerous in South Africa and 9th globally. The report by the Mexican Council for Public Security and Criminal Justice, which has been ranking the most dangerous cities, found that the murder rate increased by 37% last year. DA Shadow Minister of Police Andrew Whitfield.
We've been monitoring the crime statistics over a number of years. We picked up a trend shifting towards Nelson Mandela Bay. We launched a campaign at KwaZakele, which was one of the top 30 murder stations in the country at that time last year. There are 4 of the stations, police stations in Nelson Mandela Bay, are in the top 30 murder stations. To try and create more awareness, we've been driving a petition which we intend to take to Parliament on behalf of various communities.
And recapping our top story this hour, law enforcement agencies have cleared the N1 and N12 highways in Soweto for traffic flow after they were barricaded by protesters from the Deep Kloof hostel. Headlines at the bottom of the hour with N. Musa. For SFM News, I'm Nomalizo Mandela.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
It's 7 after 10 o'clock. You're listening to the second hour of The Talking Point. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be focusing on racism in the workplace and really how to deal and confront racism when it happens in the workplace. What is it that we should know? I suppose also learning from the experiences of others to better prepare ourselves should we be faced with such occurrences. So we'll be in conversation with a panel of really experts that will speak to different angles of this conversation coming up within this hour of the show. Before we get to that, your WhatsApp voice notes from the open line. I'll also just have a response to John, and it's a message from Jim in Valcom, who says, "Hi Cathy, I'm also a former mine worker. Please tell John that the Chamiso doctor is free. All John has to do is contact the trust himself. I was paid after 8 months. My compensation came in. The doctors are free, so John must try and seek out as much relevant information as possible. Thanks for that, Jim. Yeah, it did sound strange to me that they would insist on you using their doctors, but also then you insist that you must pay the payout. It's not what I'd remembered, but we'll follow up with John and find out who he's been dealing with from the trust, and also perhaps find out if there's been a miscommunication of sorts. But thanks for sharing your experiences with us on that one. All right, let's take a couple of WhatsApp voice notes and get straight into our second conversation of the day.
Morning, Cathy. This is Noel from Durban. Hey, Cathy, the level of crime in our country, Cathy. I hope that one day you can get hold of the Minister of Police or the Deputy Minister of Police at least. They must explain to us how are they going to remove these illegal guns that are floating all over our country. You know, there is hardly any day that any person has been shot dead. You know, it's shocking, man. It's shocking. Really, find someone from the police department and they must tell us what the plan they're going to use to execute to remove all the illegal guns.
Good morning, Cathy. Mongezi Bucendane. Can you kindly inquire from NSFAS when are they intending to finalize the applications for 2024 academic year? Right, there is thousands of students that are complaining on social media. If you go to NSFAS social media on X, you would find that many students are still having their applications awaiting evaluation. If you can inquire from NSFAS, when are they finalizing? It's really putting an unnecessary strain on us as parents. We are depressed because we don't know what's next, and particularly for students that are supposed to be focusing on education, they are stressed because they are not sure whether they are funded or not. If you can inquire from NSFAS for us, please, it would really help the nation. Thank you so much.
Princess Cathy, good morning to you, good morning to your team and your kids and all our SFM listeners. Great show always. With you, Cathy, it's Uncle JJ, the truck driver in Western Cape. Hey, Cathy, I am appealing to truck drivers, especially this company called the Wilson and Premier. Let's observe the rules of the road. If we give you a way to go, please don't push us out of the way. Those guys, the way they drive from Joburg to Cape Town, especially Wilson, I don't know what they are carrying. Are they carrying buffaloes for, I don't know, gold or what? But guys, let's observe the rules of the road so that we avoid accidents.
Good morning, Cathy. This is Zanele in Durban. About what happened in KZN during the weekend, I will only say Uduma is just a generation of the ANC Youth League that don't know nothing about respecting Ubukhosi. I think Uduma and his entire leadership must go back to the leaders of UDF so that they will learn how they were getting along with Ubukhosi and Undunankulu, Wagazulu. These people are so forwarding, they just call themselves now I'm a leader whilst they don't know nothing about leadership. Thank you.
Morning, Kitty. This is Makeba from KZN. As much as we all have the right of freedom of speech, there are certain things we can't say. You know, it's all about just timing. So, an example, you can't go to a gun-free campaign and next thing there giving the podium, you are flaunting about how many AK-47s, how many 9mm you own. Although it might be true, right? And although it might be offensive, but you can't say that. I mean, it's just the setting doesn't allow you to say that type of thing, right? That's all I'm want to say. Just like although we all have freedom of speech, but there's just limits to it.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
All right, we continue the conversation on the Talking Point, and our focus for this morning is dealing with racism in the workplace, and it follows an incident that has been playing out for some time that involves a Curro Independent School Network. So there were two recent incidents that came up. One, allegations of an Indian teacher calling a learner a monkey. In another incident, a teacher called a fellow colleague a monkey. Now, one of these incidents took place last year. In both instances, the institution suspended the teacher, and this was the teacher who had called a learner a monkey, while the other incident where the colleague had called a fellow colleague a monkey, well, that executive head of Curro Academy in Protea Glen, she was axed from her job. But it does bring into question how we deal with incidents of racism in the workplace, and it was really through, I think, the experiences of Nonkululeko Gwatu, who is a black teacher, who spoke about just the difficulties that he had experienced when speaking out about this issue, that I think it was important for us to have this conversation. Terry Oakley Smith is the MD of Diversity. Terry, good morning. Good morning, Terry.
Cathy.
Oh, there we go. We've got you on the line now. Great to have you. Great to have you for this conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Dr. Joy Owen is a professor of anthropology at the University of the Free State. I wasn't sure, is it prof or is it doctor? But I guess whichever one you prefer.
Morning, Cathy. It's associate prof, and so of course we say prof.
Oh, fantastic. You see, that's why I sounded a bit uncertain. I thought, well, the doctor and the prof doesn't make sense to me. All right, thanks for that, Prof. Dr. Shaida Jansen is a clinical psychologist. She's also UNISA Western Cape's Deputy Director for Academic and ICT Support. Dr. Jansen, good morning. Good morning, Dr. Jansen.
Sorry, I was muted. Good morning, Cathy.
All right.
Lovely to be here again.
Yes.
And good morning to the fellow panelists and to your listeners.
Fantastic. Looking forward to the conversation. And Trifina Mobai is an HR specialist and a managing director of Pahamang Human Capital Consulting. Trifina, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Good morning, your listeners, and morning, my fellow panelists.
Terry, I'm going to kick it off with you. I must say, one of the things that piqued my interest where this particular story is concerned was not just what these individuals have been accused of, which is racism, but as I saw what the teacher that was on the receiving end of these remarks, what he had gone through institutionally and also personally, I was incredibly moved by that, by what he was sharing as his experiences, because when he spoke out, he thought that that would have been well received, that it would be something that was supported. But instead, he was victimized and very much felt bullied by the institution in how they responded to these claims. So dealing with racism in the workplace, what makes it so complex or so difficult for institutions to deal with?
Thank you, Cathy. I've been dealing with this racism in the workplace for 30 years now, and I think the question you ask is so really apposite. I think any institution or workplace, in a sense, the worst thing in South Africa to be accused of is racism. There's huge shame associated with it, and there's also massive denial, and also a failure to know what to do. And I also agree with you that the teacher concerned really suffered. And I think people who are the victims of racism in workplaces suffer unduly. And I think to address this, the first thing is, and I've said this before about the Curo schools, I've even offered to help the Curo schools, that you have to have in place a policy and a process so that people know what is racism, what words constitute racism, what kind of behaviors constitute racism, with examples, with case studies. And when pupils join the school, or when teachers join the school, or if it's other organizations as part of onboarding, this kind of training should be immediately made available to them, as well as the process for reporting when they feel or worry or are concerned that they are the victims of, or who have suffered from, or who have even witnessed, been a bystander when racism occurs. And I think that is the basis, essentially.
One of the big things that came out of his experience, Nonkuleko's experience too, was just the ability, just being able to be listened to and being believed when you talk about what has happened. And the reason again why I think that that's important is because it seems that it's very easy, at least on an official level, for people to dismiss claims and accusations of racism in a workplace because they simply don't believe what people are saying, and they make up excuses for what individuals may have intended or even may have meant.
Exactly. And I think that, particularly for us as white people, Cathy, we don't have the direct experience, and therefore, and we know that it's very, it's a very bad thing. It's a very shaming thing. So we would prefer not to have to deal with it. Also, as white people, we don't think of ourselves as having a race. I mean, how many white people have you ever spoken to when you've asked what races are there in South Africa? Whiteness is hardly ever mentioned. So I think that adds and compounds the problem. And therefore, disbelieving, denying, not wanting to have anything to do with, pushing somebody aside, all of which happened to Nonkululeko, I think are symptoms of that. Denial of racism and not understanding why it is so painful and so difficult.
Professor Owen, let me bring you in here. What are the ways in which we see racism manifest itself within the confines of a workplace? Because, and the reason why I want us to really try and, where possible, focus on the workplace is because there are certain rules and regulations, there are certain behaviors that one perhaps may exhibit when they're home, that at the workplace there's a code of conduct. We're all expected to play by some rules. And I want, in your view, Professor Owen, why you think it is that the workplace then becomes an environment through which racism seems so difficult to not only identify, if it's a question of identifying, but also dealing with.
Cathy, there are no easy answers. I love the way Terry puts it into perspective, and fundamentally, contexts are important. So you recognize there that there's a code of conduct usually within workplaces. And what we don't always understand is that, yes, there's a code of conduct, but does that code of conduct have meaning for those people working in the workplace? We've also encountered each other for decades, centuries. There are ways in which we've organized ourselves, one of it being in respect of race. As an anthropologist, I would ask, is race as a biological fact real? Questionable. In respect of sociocultural meaning, is it real? Yes. So while biologically we do not divide human beings into races, culturally it has meaning. And specifically in South Africa, we know that. So things that we might consider innocuous in certain spaces becomes extremely harmful where you have different people within that space. It's very hard to navigate because we don't know each other's intention. We read the situation based on what we understand race to be. And because race, in essence, in South Africa became cultural and became culture, it's very difficult to try to make sense of our everyday engagements with each other now in the 21st century.
Cathy, can
it's
I
not
just
an easy answer.
Sorry.
Yes, sorry, Terry.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Prof. Owen.
So I hear Terry wanting to come in there, Cathy.
No, I think
she's going to disagree.
No, yes, that's fine, but you can have a chance to finish what you wanted to say. I think you just broke off on the line there, so it had sounded like you were done.
Okay, so essentially I'm saying often, and if we're looking at somebody who's been on the receiving end of racism, right, he or she has to effectively prove that they've been on the receiving end of that. And why is that the case? So yes, Terry talks about victimization, bullying, denial. The denial of whiteness is something that has an impact on the way we engage with each other. But also we need to think about what are we experiencing as those individuals? What is our individual context? So yes, we have the socio-political context, but what is the individual context? And how are we raced? And how do we race ourselves?
All right. Thanks for that contribution, Professor Owen. Terry, I'm going to give you a chance to come in.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Professor Owen. Just to say that I think that, we shouldn't be looking at the person's intention. We should be looking at the impact it has. So assuming it's a white person saying something racist to a black person, quite frankly, it doesn't matter if the white person means it or doesn't mean it or said it by mistake. What is of critical importance is how it makes the black person feel. And that's what makes it racist. And I think we spend far too much time listening to white people saying, oh, I didn't mean it. I'm married to a black person. I would never say such a thing. And in fact, that's not the issue. The issue is how did it make the black person or the biracial person or the colored person or the Indian person feel? That's where we should be putting our energy. And that's where workplace organizations should be putting their energy, and indeed Curo schools.
Well, Prof. Owen, I want to come back to you. One of the things I've had to deal with in the last couple of months especially, and it came up in our open line today, is our listeners, different parts of the country, but some of our listeners in KZN who talk about what they believe are racist attitudes displayed mainly by Indians towards black people. And of course, there are, of course, problems with just generalization. So sort of saying, white people are racist, and because that leads us into a conversation of no, not all white people are racist. And then it just, we go down a rabbit hole that almost deviates from why we started the conversation in the first place. And just this idea that in South Africa, that when we talk about racism, it's mostly centered on white people. But where do we see racist behaviors and attitudes manifesting themselves more broadly in our society?
Cathy, you're asking me very difficult questions, and so let me place myself right. I'm in education, and I think it's now a week ago, in my class, I actually asked students to self-identify according to the races. So white, Indian, colored, and then that all-encompassing term that was used during apartheid, Bantu, which was then divided into further ethnic groups, etc. Students found it very difficult to start with white, to, in essence, provide characteristics of white people. And so here we're talking about stereotypes specifically. I then moved to Indian and they couldn't do it. I moved to colored, and because they see this particular body, which they identify as colored, they were able to provide various characteristics of colored people as a general group. And as the class wore on, we unpacked these various stereotypes across these racial groups, indicating that actually all of us are multilingual. All of us have a particular understanding of what it means to be South Africa. All of us have experiences of the other, however defined, and that we are actually intimate others. We are not distant others. And hence, these particular kinds of conversations become really difficult. Because when you open it up in a classroom space, which is predominantly Black, there is a tendency to not want to talk about it. Even with 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds in the class. And of course, I find this intriguing because why don't we want to talk about it? Because there are these various iterations of racial prejudice. And often we see it in the form of microaggressions. So yes, in terms of name calling, shaming, talking about levels of intelligence, the manner in which we articulate, etc., etc. But it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for our young people to talk about it. And when I ask why, the response is silence. So what makes it difficult for us to have this conversation across the generations, within generations, within, for lack of a better word, cross-cultural spaces? Because my sense is that there always has to be a victim when we have these conversations. There always has to be a victim, and there always has to be an oppressor. And we never really look at how oppressed we still feel, even if it is psychologically, economically. We still feel it, and we don't consider what that oppression looks like on both sides.
All right. Professor
Not
Owen?
Only on the side of the... Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to pause it there. When we continue, we'll then also delve into the emotional impact of experiencing racism. It's time for the latest news headlines.
Good morning, I'm Anne Musa. In the headlines, the National Conference on 30 Years of Human Rights in South Africa has officially kicked off this morning in Boksburg, east of Johannesburg. The three-day conference will see key stakeholders and government departments reflecting on the 30 years of South Africa's transformation agenda and efforts towards promoting democracy, development and human rights. CEO of the Chamber of Business in the West Rand, Dennis Pretorius, says small businesses are bearing the brunt of water shortages in Johannesburg. For the past few weeks, the city has been grappling with serious water outages as areas fed by the Rand Water Akernoth pump station have all been affected. And the case against accused Laurentia Lombard, arrested in connection with the disappearance of 6-year-old Jocelyn Smith, has been postponed to the 25th of this month for bail information. She appeared in the Vredenburg Magistrates Court. I'll have details on these and other stories at 11.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand is currently trading at 18 rand 77 to the dollar, 23 rand 90 to the pound, and 20 rand 44 to the euro. Markets in Asia closed higher, the JSE mainly firmer in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are flat this hour. Gold is trading at $2,152, platinum $925 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $85.90 a barrel.
Friend, yes? I nearly fainted when I read somewhere that the GEPF's minimum funding level is at 72%.
Really?
Only to realize that it was in 1996 when the GEPF was founded.
Okay.
I just saw my pension going.
You like drama, hey friend? Sure.
We've come a long way. GEPF's minimum funding level is at 110.1%. This means that the GEPF has 1 rand 10 cents for every 1 rand it owes its retiring members. GEPF members are more than covered when they retire with the GEPF. Tomorrow shouldn't be a worry when today is done right. GEPF, your investment, your future.
You could be like 40-year-old Tulani, who got a real saving of 38% by only paying 853 rand per month on his white 2023 Hyundai Grand i10 1.0 Motion. Don't hesitate. Get a quote from Outsurance and see if you could save on your car insurance. SMS out to 30754 to get a quote now. Licensed insurer and FSP premiums are risk profile dependent and reviewed annually. T's and C's online.
Cathy Mohlahlana on SAFM.
Thanks for staying with the talking point. We're focusing on racism in the workplace. I'm joined by a number of guests that are sharing their insights into this issue. Terry Oakley-Smith, MD Diversity, Professor Joy Owen, Professor of Anthropology at the University of the Free State. Dr. Shahida Jansen is a clinical psychologist, and Trifina Mobai is an HR specialist and managing director of Pahamang Human Capital. So, Dr. Jansen, let me then come to you and talk about the psychological impact of racism, because in both what Terry and Professor Owen have had to say in laying a foundation for this conversation, we've heard the words shame, we've heard the words denial, we've heard the words microaggressions, we've heard the words impact on individuals. So it is a very psychological experience, it seems to me.
Yes, Cathy. I think it's not just psychological, but it's also deeply spiritual. It goes to the depth of who we are. So I think the what I want to bring in here is, often we start with what makes us different. So especially when we talk about racism, and of course we are different. We've had almost 400 years of difference, 50 years of apartheid. So all we've ever, learned about is how we're different. What I think is important to start with is, in what way are we the same? And this is for me where models of the self, models of local people's understanding of who we are. Because research confirms that most people in South Africa, irrespective of what race or ethnicity we are, we see ourselves in relational terms. And I heard what was it Teddy was saying about the shame of, or the invisibility of whiteness. But I think in general, people see themselves in relational terms, not as separate individuals who are dominant and kind of see themselves over other people. We tend to see ourselves in relational terms, because then it gives us an opportunity to explore in what way is your way of seeing yourself say, as a Christian, for example, in what way is a Christian identity a relational identity? In what way is when you speak Sepedi or you speak isiZulu, in what way does that give you a relational understanding of yourself? And then what are the values, what are the values that we share in common? Because as human beings, what do we want? We want to be accepted. We want to be, you said, the man said he wasn't heard. You said, and I understand this context where you can feel that you are not being heard. It's impossible. The listening is not happening. And what is foundational to a human being is we want to be heard. We want to be affirmed. We want to be visible. And so whether it is racism or any other kind of violence, that we are at the receiving end of, it leaves us feeling less human, invisible, that we don't matter, that we do not have value, all right? What I try to do in the work that I do, for example, I facilitate groups, men's groups, psychotherapy groups with men. And I may have in that group an Afrikaner white male or an English-speaking white male. I may have a Zulu speaker in the group, a Xhosa speaker, a Sepedi person. And so where do I start when I'm in a group of these diverse men? I start with what they have in common, besides their manhood, which is also diverse, okay? Because different men don't see themselves in the same way. So I think, Cathy, the emphasis that I want to come with is, can we first agree on a common theory of what makes us human? We desperately need that as South Africans, because, and if I can also just relate in terms of as a manager, right? What I think is often absent in the workplaces is that we wait until there is an incident, and especially a very highly volatile, emotional incident like racism. Like it was said here, nobody wants to be accused of being a racist. It's deeply shaming and shameful. But what are we putting in place of belonging and ritualizing our common humanity? I'm going to stop there. Thank you. But I just wanted to make that point of how can we as South Africans begin to affirm what we have in common, so that not to deny differences, we are different. That's for sure. But we cannot only emphasize our differences. We have to start from a place of commonality. And I'll stop there. I'm scared.
Trifina, how do we do that in the context of a workplace? Because, in HR, you guys, you come up with policies and you say, we must this, we must that, and we all, we accept the code of conduct when we agree to be part of institutions. And when it comes to reporting, most companies will be able to say, no, but this is what we subscribe to as organizations. This is what we say we believe in. But it doesn't always reflect or represent the culture and what people's experiences of an environment might be.
Thank you, Cathy. I think you are right to say we will be waving a piece of paper to say, yeah, but this is what we believe in. This is what you signed for. Meanwhile, in actual practice, you find that there are a lot of underlying issues. There are a lot of unsaid or unheard people that are feeling the impact of racism, and yet they are not being listened to appropriately. However, my belief is that it should start at the very top. The top management should start by displaying diversity, by displaying equity, by displaying inclusivity. In that way, the people that are following them will then be able to realize that actually racism is not welcomed in this place. But as long as the top guns are not displaying it openly, the other people will just take advantages. And we as HR, we can do as much as we can in terms of, like you just alluded, policies, in terms of training, in terms of workshopping the people, but it also lies with the very same employees that should be able to report the incidents. They should be able to stand against racism, and if possible, to even form groups whereby if one person has experienced unfriendly behavior from either management or from the fellow colleague, there should be unity amongst them, and they should stand together and say, this we cannot accept. That's how we can build the culture of the company going forward. Otherwise, it will just keep perpetuating over and over again.
But Trifina, if we look at how things in corporate tend to often run, is that if you do speak out and you're supported by others, then that's the surest way of working yourself out of a job. People are targeted. People are victimized for talking too much. That's the reality of what we're dealing with, not what we want to be dealing with, but it's what people experience in the workplace on a day-to-day basis. So again, our HR departments will tell us, no, this happened, it should never have happened, we condemn. But the reality is, if the experience of the person who's coming forward and is saying, I have been victimized through whatever process is carried out, if that experience does not lead to one feeling that there was a true intention of understanding the issue, of dealing with the issue, then the system becomes unreliable. It has no credibility, which is why people don't then report racism in workplaces.
That is so true, Cathy, because they end up either suffering like underlying factors, stress-related diseases. They end up being unproductive. Others end up resigning, because if you support your fellow colleague, given the current unemployment rate, you're thinking, Jesus, I'm going to lose my job. I've got a family to feed. So, because it hasn't happened to me, I'd rather keep quiet. I need that promotion that's coming. I need that increase that is coming. I need my performance appraisals to look good. Otherwise, I'm not going to be fighting for somebody else's battle, which is unfortunate, but that is the reality of the environment that we live in.
Yeah, Terry, if we were to truly, meaningfully change things, what would we need to do? Because as the discussion is going on and we look at, well, what are the interventions in place, it seems that all those interventions do is enable the ecosystem. They enable the racism to continue.
I think we must be careful of saying that all companies, because I've worked in a number of companies which have really made sterling efforts to deal with racism. But I would agree with you, there are still far too many that do not. And I really agree with what Trifina says about people holding back and not wanting to say anything. And in the end, it's so self-defeating for the company, because having an organization which is diverse and inclusive has a direct impact on the bottom line. So if people can't bring their real selves into the workplace, then the company is going to be losing out. And if I could just say something about, I think it was Joy who mentioned that we only deal with whiteness and blackness. I don't think that's true. When I work in KwaZulu-Natal, for example, the issue of whether Indians are racist or examples of how Indians may have been racist, the relationship between Indian people and Zulu people has a history which is really painful, and one has to deal with that. And of course, in the Western Cape, there's a huge coloured population. So there, the racism discussion isn't just about white and black. But I loved what she said about similarities. And I always start my sessions off on how are we similar? What do we have in common? And I think, just as Joy said, that's a fundamental stepping stone for then moving on to look at how are we different. And it won't obviously just be race, although we're talking about race today.
Yeah, I guess perhaps, Terry, the point is really that the way in which we have conversations, particularly more broadly around racism in the country, it seems to center on, Black people experiencing racism at the hands of white people, that we don't look at how else it manifests itself, just as you've given in the examples of KZN, in the examples of the Western Cape. Those examples come up more rarely than the others. But it doesn't mean that the experiences of racism in those ways is less frequent.
That is true, Cathy. But if I can just, but then it forces us to take a step back and, and ask ourselves, what is racism if it's a system that has been able to continue for hundreds of years? We still see, where groups of people are defined as not human enough, right? Or not good enough. And so we also need to be careful that we don't want to start looking at it, how it manifests here and there, but we need to go to the root of the problem. Because as a country, we have never gone through a process of collective healing. You can never have almost 400 years of what has happened to us, and we've never had a village to village where we're really able to sit down and rework that trauma and reclaim our humanity. And so I think that, of course, it's going to manifest everywhere, and it will manifest with particular groups in particular way. It will manifest in KwaZulu-Natal, and it will manifest in the Western Cape. It is everywhere. One of the academics, Zamitri Erasmus, she said, you cannot live in a country like South Africa and not have internalized some level of racism. And so it's everywhere, it's in every institution, it's in every place, it's in every organization. And I think once we actually start to understand, a little bit deeper where we come from, how deep it is, how complex it is, how layered it is, then perhaps, we start to find the interventions at a country level, at a broad level, to start implementing it little bit by little bit. Thank you.
All right. Trifina, I see you also have your hand up there. You want to contribute?
Yes. I just want to add on what you alluded to earlier on when you said we seem to be looking at racism as coming from the white to the blacks, for example, as if, there isn't any other form of racism. I want to give here an example that personally I experienced, whereby a manager in the organization accidentally sent out the list of the staff that reported to her with all the salaries indicated. And then, to my surprise, I realized that the gentleman who was white that I brought into the organization and I processed his offer letter. Within a few months that we joined the company together, he was earning much higher than what I was earning. And this was done by a female black leader within the organization. So it's not even about black and white. Sometimes it's even black against black that I personally experienced. And this was a woman. I just want to mention the company.
And you're bringing another touchy subject. Prof, is the issues of salaries and what people earn, is that an indication of racism? That if I'm in the same job with a white or Indian counterpart, but they earn much more than I do, can I say that that is racism? Professor Owen?
It's a race.
I don't know, Terry. I mean, look, this is, and I'm going to say it again, this is a very difficult conversation to have because in many ways we're having the conversation out of context. So there are other factors as well that we would have to include when we are looking at salaries. And we argue in terms of merit, etc. But these are the kinds of conversations that we then need to have with HR business partners, where we are actually able to ask them, why is this person actually earning more than I am? And is it something that we can discuss in relation to what he or she brings into the workplace, experience, etc., etc. So I, for one, am not one person to say, racism or racial prejudice is the first thing we should always go to. It seems to be the knee-jerk reaction in South Africa if there are problems. It's the first thing we move towards when we say, I'm having an issue with a counterpart or with someone higher than I am or someone lower. It's a racial thing. That's the first thing we go to. But I'm arguing and suggesting that maybe we just need to take a break, stop, and wonder if there are other reasons as to why we are actually not interacting or gelling. And that can be inclusive of what Shahida mentioned. This could be a spiritual problem. I mean, we're talking broader, right? But also one thing we seem to forget, specifically in South Africa, race and class are intimately tied to each other. And when we talk about the workplace, we are also talking about class. And we're talking about how people connect across class, not only race. And how often you find understanding in a class space, working class people, middle class, the elite. And then you wonder, where has race gone? So in that moment, has money become more important?
Sure.
So there are other kinds of questions I think we need to ask.
I think that the one thing that this conversation is showing me is that we cannot have only this conversation to try and unpack this issue. I've got at least about 5 more topics just coming out from what has come out so far. Mampondo, you are in Mafikeng. Good morning.
Good thing, ma'am. It shows by the myriad of perspectives that have been provided by the guests that you have. Race issue is a complex matter and it can never be solved. There's no panacea as well. Instant, you see. In my own experience, I'm a child who's born in Soweto, grew up in a marginalized background, primary school in an underprivileged school, and went to a Model C school, go foreign to war school, and then went to university, go UJ, go Mafikeng, go human settlement. Ma'am, but we are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder because it's racism and a continuing, a perpetuating the processes tsa gompieno tsa tsamaiso le di-structures tse leng teng ka gobane a di tsamaisetsane le borona ebile a di re lokolle yaanong racism o ba o e fetsa so of cases ke a bona o batla ke summarize ntweng ke batla o tsho so ma'am racism a gona panacea ya yona ene go thata gore re fitlhelele ko molemong o tla itlisang ka obane e tletse ka dintlha ko bathong ene o right mui o reng le rona batho ba batsho ba gateletsweng ebile se rena le bokgoni ba go
All right, Mampondo. We're going to have to leave it there. Mampondo out in Mafikeng. Basically, he's saying that racism is manifest in all spheres of our society. He speaks about his experience being a government official and how he believes that as black people, we're suffering from post-traumatic stress due to having lived under racism, and that also is manifesting itself in how we deal with matters and issues in the workplace. And so there isn't a one answer to dealing with the issue of racism. All right, here's my challenge, is that we're completely out of time for this conversation. What I am going to say is that we're going to have a follow-up conversation on this, because there's so many different threads that I think we will need to unpack, but also give the opportunity for people to also have a lot more engagement, which is what I'm seeing is also needed. So I'm not going to give all of you the opportunity to wrap up. I'm just going to thank you for making time for this conversation, and hopefully we can continue where we have left off in the next week or two. It will be on a Monday. It will be the same time slot, and we'll just unpack some of the other issues that we have not had time to get into. But our panelists and guests are right when they say that racism is a complex issue, and there's a lot for us, I think, to take away from this conversation to reflect on too. That's where we leave it for this hour.
Sundays at 2 p.m. S3 is your home for Indian cinema. From February the 18th, sit back and relax as you enjoy a world of colorful entertainment. We guarantee you a memorable experience with the best Bollywood has to offer. Enjoy the Holy Festival of Color with premium Indian cinema movies. Catch all the drama, adventure, comedy, and romance on Sundays, 2 p.m. exclusive to S3.
Seychelles have a plan to steal Malawi's joy. However, the Southern African outfit is not worried. They will reveal their strategy on the sand. It is another East versus South battle. This is the COSAFA Beach Soccer Championship 2023. Experience the battle on the sand between Seychelles and Malawi at the South Beach Arena in Durban. This Wednesday, 20 March 2024 at 10:30 a.m. Live on SABC Sport on TTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
Public Works and Infrastructure Minister Sihlezi Kalala is proud to announce that the country will host Africa's largest sustainable infrastructure development symposium from the 17th to the 19th of March at the Cape Town International Convention Centre, where President Cyril Ramaphosa will also deliver a keynote address. SIDSA highlights include the showcasing of progress of South Africa's infrastructure investment plan as adopted by Cabinet, unveiling of a pipeline of 12 infrastructure priorities for project preparation and funding for the 2024-2025 financial year. This message has been brought to you by the Infrastructure of South Africa, an entity by the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. The South African government leaving no one behind.
Independent and impartial. This is SAFM News.
In our top stories, National Conference on Human Rights underway and small businesses bear the brunt of Johannesburg water shortages. Good morning. The National Conference on 30 Years of Human Rights in South Africa is officially underway in Boksburg, east of Johannesburg. The three-day conference will see key stakeholders and government departments reflecting on 30 years of South Africa's transformation agenda and efforts towards promoting democracy, development and human rights. The conference, hosted by the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, has been themed 3 decades of respect for and promotion of human rights. Minister Ronald Lamula says he hopes the conference will lead to meaningful solutions to address the socio-economic issues plaguing the country.
It is indeed a watershed moment for the country. 30 years of democracy. We have to take stock, assess how far have we gone with regards to the protection and and the promotion of human rights. I believe we have done our best to do that in terms of what is contained in the Bill of Rights, but we might be looking more on the socio-economic rights. So I hope that this conference will take us to deal with that, particularly to create an equal society in the next 30 years, that all South Africans should be able to feel that their socio-economic rights must be taken to the next level.
Gauteng High Court Judge Chifiwa Maumela will appear before a judicial conduct tribunal this morning. The tribunal, led by retired Justice of the Constitutional Court, Chris Jafta, is expected to probe a complaint lodged by Gauteng Judge President Dunstan Mlambo against Judge Maumela. Mlambo laid a complaint against Judge Maumela regarding alleged excessive delays in handing down a significant number of judgments. Prabashini Moodley reports.
Gauteng High Court Judge Tsiviwa Maumela was suspended in June last year while he was presiding over the high-profile Senzo Meyiwa trial. The Judicial Services Commission recommended in April last year that Judge Maumela and Justice Nomonde Mcebisa Tusi be suspended pending the outcome of an inquiry after complaints about them delaying judgments. At the time, it was believed that some of Maumela's judgments have been outstanding for between 7 and 26 months.
CEO of the Chamber of Business in the West Rand, Dennis Pretorius, says small businesses are bearing the brunt of water shortages in Johannesburg. For the past few weeks, the city has been grappling with serious water outages as areas fed by the Rand Water Eikenhof pump station, such as Randburg, Roodepoort, Soweto, Johannesburg South and Johannesburg Central, have all been affected. Pretorius says there's likely to be job losses if Johannesburg dry spell continues. He says small businesses don't have the capacity to overcome the constant water outages.
Well, you have two groups of members that are very small businesses that cannot really plan for this sort of thing. I'm thinking of the car washers, the people that cook and prepare meals for other people and sell it and depend on that as their sole income. Big business generally have the capacity to manage the problem.
Law enforcement agencies have cleared the N1 and N12 highways in Soweto for traffic flow after they were barricaded by protesters from the Diepkloof hostel. The situation remains calm, with police managing the situation as the hostel residents continue to express their frustration. The residents have staged a protest to express their dissatisfaction with service delivery, stating that they live in deplorable conditions despite recently having water and electricity connected. A 32-year-old woman has appeared in the Vredenburg Magistrates Court in connection with the disappearance of 6-year-old Jocelyn Smith from Saldanha Bay. She was arrested over the weekend. The case against the accused, Laurentia Lombard, has been postponed to the 25th of this month for bail information. The search for Jocelyn, however, continues. Last week, 3 accused, including the child's mother, appeared in court. Kelly Smith and a co-accused abandoned bail and will remain in custody until their next court appearance in May. And finally, a BBC investigation has revealed that dozens of women from Malawi working as domestic servants in Oman have suffered abuse. They had travelled to the Gulf state after being promised good jobs by recruitment agencies. The BBC's Azizat Ulalua reports.
Women told Africa Eye that they were beaten, raped and treated like prisoners whilst working in the Gulf country. The Malawi government has paid over $160,000 to release and repatriate more than 50 female domestic workers. According to recent data, there have been no prosecutions of Omani nationals for treatment of domestic workers. Oman's Labour Ministry has told the BBC forced labour is illegal and it has only received 1 complaint from a Malawian domestic worker in the 2 years to 2023.
Recapping the top story, the National Conference on 30 Years of Human Rights in South Africa is officially underway in Boksburg, east of Johannesburg. For SFM News, I am Anne Musa.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the talking point. It's 7 after 11 o'clock. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be looking at the innovation that has been introduced at the University of the Western Cape. It's in relation to their first-year students and how they're taking them out into the world, at least their future workplaces. It's done with first-year students in the sector, in the foundation phase sector. And these are, of course, going to be teaching students. They want to show them what the social background of their future learners might be, so that they're better equipped to deal with learners from all walks of life. Well, how is it going? We'll find out with the University of the Western Cape's Professor Govender. All of that in a moment. We've got a lot of your responses to the conversation we had in the last hour around racism. And like I said, there's still so many different issues to unpack, and that will not be the last time that we have that conversation.
Cathy, good morning. It's Tagata in Cape Town. Seemingly South Africans are just diverting the focus of what is at hand. The crime is overwhelming in South Africa, and whoever calls another person a monkey should be dealt with. That is okay. But these things, man, it's been a long time now. We're talking about people calling other people animals, baboon, monkeys, and all those things. It's supposed to be on the policies of that institution that should anyone found guilty of that, the punishment is going to be harsher so that the others could learn the lesson. Thanks, Tagata.
Good morning, Oskethi, and good morning to your guest. Oskethi, the problem is that there is no consequences of people calling other people K-words, calling them monkeys. There is no proper punishment for those people. If you look at what happened at Cricket South Africa there, that inquiry, what happened after that? Now look at what happened in Mpumalanga there. A young man was called the K-word. No consequences. They still do those things. Remember the guy who peed on someone's stuff? Here in the trucking industry, we have got truck drivers who are white who get paid more than us black people. So it is what it is, Oskethi.
Hi, Cathy, Craig and KZN. You know, not only white people are capable of racism. Personally, I hate racism. I was raised very much differently. I was a street child. I grew up with black people on the streets. But I can tell you now, I've been called pink so often in the past couple of years. You're not white, you're pink, man. You look like your mother's this and that. And I'll tell you what, racism, it's not a white thing. It's not a white thing. It's also a black thing, and it's becoming more so. And I'm somebody that used to be on the run, on the street. I've spent years inside prison with black people. Two different kinds of racism, but they amount to the same thing, hatred. And we all need to look at ourselves. Anyway, ciao.
Good morning, Zagaria, a truck driver. This is Cathy. Those Equity acts there by the walls of the companies. They are only there to decorate the companies. Nothing else. That's my view regarding this issue of racism.
Hi, Cathy, Bantum Chiselwa here. The problem when it comes to issues of conversation around racism, we put the perpetrator in the center of the conversation of how the perpetrator feels, what they meant or did not mean, and always overlook the fact that there is a person who feels that they were treated unfairly and there's an injustice in the process. And at the end of the day, we cannot be gaslighting people's experiences. There's terms like race card. Who came up with that term? It's the perpetrator or a possible perpetrator of racism that came up with that term that people are pulling a race card.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Yeah, thanks for all of your contributions on the WhatsApp line. I think, again, a reflection of just how many more conversations we need to have to really understand what continues to drive racism in our country. And I think where possible and where needed, to continue calling each other out where we see racist attitudes, racist behaviors, because it's only in the honesty of the conversation that a process of true healing can meaningfully begin to take place. Our final conversation of the morning is with the Dean of Faculty of Education at the University of the Western Cape, Professor Rajendran Govender. Professor Govender, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy.
Yes, I've finally got you on the line now. Great to have you with us on the show. So you've decided to switch things up a bit for your first-year students who've signed up for education, particularly to teach the foundation phase. I don't know if this is the first time you're doing this, Professor Govender, but perhaps speak to us about the approach to learning that you're taking for your first-year students.
Yeah, this comes from a background of our personal experience as learners when we were in school in the disadvantaged areas in the country, and having gone through the system and becoming to study to become a teacher myself, and becoming a college lecturer and becoming a subject advisor in the Department of Education in KwaZulu-Natal, and then coming into the university, teaching at universities that were which were in the part of the disadvantaged groups, and looking at exactly what's actually happening in schools across the country, particularly the Quintile 1 and Quintile 2 and the Quintile 3 schools, where learners and teachers have the challenges in terms of having an enabling environment to facilitate meaningful learning against a backdrop of all the social challenges and context that we have, both in terms of the kind of violence around our schools, as well as not being able to get to school because they have to work part-time, etc., and also the whole issue of nutrition in schools. And we have realized in the Faculty of Education that there's a big change from a school environment into a higher education environment. Particularly in a school environment, learners are kind of highly supported by the teachers in terms of studying for the examinations and passing the examinations and getting marks to enter into university. But we, as colleagues involved in teacher education, have realized that being at a university that develops teachers is far more than just the academic aspect. The co-curricular aspect is fundamentally important in developing a holistic teacher to ensure that they go out with a well-balanced understanding of their portfolio in order to develop our learners in schools in nuanced ways, using much more ways that will promote critical thinking, creative thinking, and problem solving, and not just the rote learning and the passing of the examinations. So the Faculty of Education embarked on this particular project through, obviously, we have a community of practice amongst our teacher educators, and Prof. Joseph De Beer, who is an expert scholar and has brought this idea and shared this idea with me as Dean, and I said to him, we'll support that. And this excursions was made possible by funding received from Albert Wessel's Trust Fund, which the Dean has used his discretion to employ the funds and deploy the funds to a meaningful first-year experience for our students, so that they come into a higher education environment and understand what it is, and more importantly, to break down those fears and forming partnerships with their own peers now that they meet for the first time, but in more meaningful ways through engaging in activities, communicating with each other, and also doing particular activities and excursion where they work together in collaborative ways, think of strategies. Now, how will they solve the problem? What strategies they'll use? What method they will follow? And also reflect on that and share on that. And it also exposes them to different kinds of pedagogies and also what they would expect in the teacher profession. It gives them an eye-opener to that so that they know what to expect and what to develop. And more importantly, the last point I want to make is that students come from schools after 12 years of experience looking at how the teacher taught them, isn't it? And they want to model the same way when they go into school. So we at universities need to break that cycle. We need to break the cycle to ensure that they now look at new ways of teaching that's relevant to the 21st century and preparing our learners for the world of work.
So, Prof, what does this experience entail?
Yeah. So what basically we look at firstly exposing them to what is expected of a teacher in the teaching profession, and we share that with them, and we look at what are their experiences, and through some videos we show them what are some modelings of teachers that we expect for them to be looking up to in terms of how to facilitate learning and teaching in the classroom. More importantly, we also expose them to different range of pedagogies through some activities that we give them on the excursion itself to do. And it's important is to build a sense of community of practice. So that's a third thing. And in order to enable the students to be the principle of self-directed learning, we want to give a good exposition to our students because they need to know how to take responsibility for their own learning and their own metacognitive processes as we move through learning in higher education institutions.
So you then went to Betty's Bay, right? And
yes.
When you arrived there, what do you do? Why did you choose Betty's Bay as the area that you would use for this kind of learning?
Yeah. So last year we used Disa Kloof. It was able to accommodate our students, which was about 180 students. It had a big enough camp site, for rooms. But this time the venue was booked out and we had to look at an alternative venue, which was Betty's Bay, that could accommodate a reasonable number of our students. So we had 2 sessions at Betty's Bay. One of the reasons why we took them there is that it has the necessary facilities to ensure that our students firstly are comfortable in the safety is of high priority. And we then looked at also, when we take the students out there, do we have the kind of facilities that will enable us to do the activities in a big hall, to enable them to do group work on their own? And also it was the botanical garden that we took our students to, the Harry Potter botanical gardens, where we wanted to give them a sense of looking at some of the plants in the gardens and doing some activities in terms of learning and exposing them of some new ways of teaching in their own classrooms in terms of particularly science teaching. Yeah.
I see that some of the activities that the learners engaged in included them making or starting a fire, warming up water on the fire and using that to bath. I don't know whether it was in the mornings or in the evenings. So I'm just trying to understand in terms of the thinking from the institution. Obviously, this is a very curated environment, so whatever happens there is not necessarily happening organically. What you found the benefit of that is versus taking these learners into actual communities where this is the lived experience of people.
Yeah. So what we mentioned there is the boiling of water. It's a referral to what happens. I mean, I myself, when I was young, we should boil water outside and to have a shower, have a bath. So we refer to that case, not necessarily that what was done at the excursion. But what we did at the excursion was we asked the students to build a sun stove, and they worked in group to see how what best strategy they can use to maximize the heat of the water, And it was an experiment, and in that experiment was purpose to see what kind of thinking, what kind of strategies, and how they collaborate and work together in terms of putting ideas. And then we kind of measured after some time, after leaving that in the environment under a particular position where you could get maximum heat, and then reflecting on that and measuring and see who had the highest temperature, and then kind of after doing that is to reflect on the teaching of it, you see. So that was the activity that we did in particular.
Yeah.
So
I guess what I'm trying to understand, Prof, is what you believe the benefit of having these experiences with the students in an environment that has been curated as such versus having these experiences in real life.
Yeah. So Cathy,
so why not take them to an informal settlement that's close to the university, so that they get to see and experience what you're talking about, because the innovation right is said to be about exposing these first-year students to the social background of potentially who some of their future learners might be.
Yeah. So Cathy, this is part of the trajectory of events that we will have for students as they become immersed into the profession or becoming professional teachers. So certainly in our work integrated learning context, we have those kinds of opportunities for our students to go out in groups to particular schools, and obviously, do work integrated teaching practice sessions. But this was just an initially a welcome to the students, just to orientate them to the university kind of experience and to give them a taste of what to expect in the teacher education program within the faculty, and how to work with others and the peers as support groups in order to manage the learning and the work at that university itself. So the opportunity of going into informal settlements exists, but it needs to be much more planned for in terms of the number of students that we take through. Yeah.
When you think about what education will look like in the next 10 years, which is really the work that is going into preparing, let's say, somebody who's somebody who is in first year this year, how different do you think classrooms are going to look or should look for the kind of future that we are anticipating, especially when we look at the role of technology, including in education?
Yeah. So Cathy, the issue of hybrid learning and blended learning, as well as face-to-face learning, is high on the agenda, both in terms of teaching and learning and assessment, online assessment. So the faculty has embraced that in its strategic plan some time ago. We this particular faculty of education, located in the University of Western Cape, has now in 2023 opened up the state-of-the-art faculty of education building, which I think is best in the country and comparable to Africa, which has the latest technology of how to model teaching for the 21st century. We have the latest technology tools in our rooms, including cameras that can track students' communication with the lecturer, amongst the peers, etc., and also for teaching. We have obviously artificial intelligence and the tools associated with that. We are the cutting edge of actually engaging with those items. So we are abreast. So we can see in the next 5 years, given the fact that schools will also be making some reforms in that we need to also make sure that our teachers are prepared and enabled to do that. So our teacher education programs are geared for that, and we have started the process, and we will obviously vigorously improve in terms of the extent to which it be included, incorporated into other modules within the faculty. So AI is going to be kind of reshaping the way we facilitate teaching, learning, and assessment, and engage with our learners in the classroom and as well as in higher education institutions where we are as teacher educators.
Of course, we also have the challenge of the gap that exists in our education system, especially when it comes to being able to access technology. And I wonder what impact you believe this is going to have, again, on education more holistically going into the future.
Yeah. So if you use the excursions as a vehicle to enhance that, so one could look at a way of going to centers of excellence to enable the students to learn and witness much more informed and relevant strategies for education for both learners and also teachers. But I think the important thing of all of this here is that it does not mean that a particular community doesn't have it, that will not be able to enable them to do that. There's what we call centers of excellence, and working with private organizations and other sponsors, we can see how we can reach particularly the quintile 1 and quintile 2 and quintile 3 schools in trying to set up some kind of workshop, because we have in our faculty what we call community engagement projects, where we adopt particular communities. For example, currently we have a project with Kailicha where we're looking at how to teach maths and science using ethnomathematics and indigenous knowledge systems. So so there are ways of engaging with particular communities. Obviously, it needs to be scaled up, and if it needs to be scaled up, then obviously it comes with the issue of resources as well.
Yeah, and as you're speaking, Prof, I'm thinking about just also the need to create that appetite in young people to be players in the quintile 1, 2, and 3 space, because what we often see is that once sometimes people are done, it becomes very difficult for these schools to retain professional teachers because of where they are often located, which is in your informal areas, which is in your township areas. And once somebody has completed their degree, they don't necessarily want to find themselves teaching those areas because it's not as lucrative as perhaps teaching in private schools or private institutions. And I wonder what your take is on that, especially from what the young students are saying to you. We'll continue the conversation with Professor Govender in a moment. It's 11:30.
Okay.
Good morning, I'm Anne Musa. In the headlines, the National Conference on 30 Years of Human Rights in South Africa is officially underway in Boksburg, east of Johannesburg. Minister Ronald Lamola says he hopes the conference will lead to meaningful solutions to address the socio-economic issues plaguing the country. The issue of plagiarism at the institutions of higher learning is once again under the spotlight. This time, the University of South Africa, UNISA, has confirmed an investigation into thousands of students accused of plagiarism. And the Pan-South African Language Board in the Northern Cape has unveiled the first edition of the Nama Language Spelling and Orthography Rules Book. I'll have details on these and other stories at 12.
All right, we continue the conversation on the talking point. Professor Rajendran Govender is the Dean of Faculty of Education at the University of the Western Cape. So, Prof, I was asking you just before the headlines, what do we do then to try and create a culture where even some of the young people that you're grooming in your corridors of learning today will want to go to quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools versus going to private institutions where they often would be paid much better salaries.
Yeah. So, Cathy, while you're there, I need to take the opportunity of talking a little bit about that. And just in the last week or some, we had a huge meeting with the mathematical sciences group, and my concern is just as equal as yours, because we find across quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools, we do not have teachers who necessarily are appropriately qualified to teach particular subjects, and it's quite widespread. And I absolutely agree with you that we need to find some strategies of how, after we train teachers, that they are able to be taking up opportunities in the quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools. So one of them should be some incentives. We need to engage with government and the Department of Higher Education to see how do we provide some kind of incentives for the teachers to remain in the schools and see it worthwhile teaching at the schools and contributing to the community. And obviously one of them is obviously looking at a special kind of attraction, what you call it, bonus or salary for them. And we need to do that. I mean, it's natural that teachers will always want to move to an area where the facilities and services are better, but how do we really address that? And I think we also need to search our conscience. I mean, how as teachers, I mean, what is our role and what contribution can we make to the country, and therefore we should take up these particular positions, and the issue of initial teacher education, providing bursaries for the students with particular understanding that they will come back to the community. But I think this needs a much more broader discussion with all stakeholders to see how we really attract and retain teachers in these environments.
Yeah, it is absolutely a big challenge, but I think that the idea of exposing these students to what the experiences of their future learners might be is perhaps a good starting point. And of course, the assumption isn't to say that some may not know, but it's to say we make sure everybody's on the same page and create and cultivate, I don't know, a bigger purpose behind why they would be getting why they would be teaching in the first place. That, it's about, if you are able to change the life of a young person who comes from this kind of background, chances are you are creating hope within that environment, within that ecosystem, that can lead to a better trajectory or even better outcomes for that community. And that's really what the power of education and teaching is.
Yeah. So to enable that to happen, what we do is, for example, we have, it's a 4-year course at our Howard institution and many other institutions. So we have what we call teaching practice, where students go out for at least in the 4 years for about 20 weeks. And it moves from mainly year 1, a little bit 2 weeks, and year 2, and then year 3 and year 4 is quite a bit. And so what we do is we try to rotate the students across schools so they get a varied set of experiences of what are the schools where they have all the facilities to teach, and the Model C schools, and then we move into the other set of schools, and also the quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools. So students do have a set of exposure to the schools, and sometimes we allow students who come from particular areas to choose their own schools for a particular few weeks, so they can have an experience of what to teach, what is it like in their own area to teach. Yeah.
All right, Professor Govender, we'll leave it there with you for this morning. Rajendran Govender is the Dean of Faculty of Education at the University of the Western Cape. So that's where we'll leave it with that particular conversation. Of course, there's still lots on the go. The Justice Conference, which we spoke about last week, has been underway in the east of Gauteng, and I see that we've had not only the Justice Minister there, we've had the Speaker of Parliament opening the session, we've had the Chief Justice Raymond Zondo giving his address and his thoughts and reflections on 30 years of democracy, and then we've also had the President Cyril Ramaphosa making his own remarks. So undoubtedly there'll be lots of reflection reflections on that conference. It's a 3-day conference. The question is, what will they accomplish out of it? Well, that's what we'll be watching closely. So you can expect all of that on the talking point as the afternoon unfolds. Of course, we also have the book reading still coming up in this hour, and lots of your WhatsApp voice notes to the different conversations we've been having throughout the day. For now, we're going to take a quick break.
Fly better to your next holiday. Book your flights with Emirates to a holiday in Dubai, London, Istanbul, or Paris. Look forward to delicious regionally inspired cuisine, enjoy free-flowing premium drinks, and relax to your favorite movies on the way. Because it's not just about the destination, it's how you get there. This year, fly Emirates. Fly better.
It has been over 20 years since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued its final report, recommending over 300 cases to be investigated or prosecuted. Truth Be Told tells the story of the TRC by looking at the poignant cases of the Pila Portia Ndwandwe story, the Beki Mlanjeni story, the Ntombi Kubeka story, the Topsy Madaka story, in which the truth has not been told and no one has been held accountable for their gruesome killings during apartheid. Channel your best South African documentary this March on Truth Be Told, Mondays at 9 p.m. only on
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Good morning, Cathy. This is Anela Indeben. I think how I came to understand racism. It's an act of being exposed to resources or of having privilege to be exposed to the resources, because those people who push this or who exercise freely that racism thing are the people who are exposed to resources, people who are who have something in their hand so that they will deprive other people those resources. And I think it's an act of being privileged. Thank you.
Hi, Cathy, and good morning to the listeners. I think it's totally the woman who's saying that she don't know why West people are paying more than the black. They said that most of the what they use the expensive stuff than the black. I am example. When I go to look a house, when they are out during the day or during the night, they have to offer me 200 or 250 per night. While if they hire a white person, they pay them about 1,000. It's the same like during the day. If you go there and feed the dog, they pay them about 500, and they have to pay me like 200 or 250. So that should be the reason. So I'm giving you example.
Hello, Cathy. See, with racism, my brother was at school as a chef, so he went back to the town of Port Edward, to the village. And then there was a hotel there called Edwardian, and then the hotel was called Estuary. He was employed there, and then he tried to get his friend to come, who was white, to come and work there with him because they were friends. So the guy went to this and he got a job, and then they were working the same until one day they were going to a party. So I think my brother saw the salary of the guy, of this white fellow, and then he realized that this white fellow is actually paid 20,000 and yet he was paid 4,000 for being a new chef, yet this guy was here before him. You see?
Hi, my name is Leslie Dima. Cathy, when it comes to the racism, there's no equality on earth. There's no equality on earth. as God created everything here on earth, we put a blind person, we put a sight-seeing person, we put a disabled, we put the deaf, and everything. Those people were designed differently. So the point is we are divided, and even there's a black and white, and then we've got culture, and then we've got skills. Some of people are business skilled. Some of people are rich, some of them are poor. That thing is natural. However, the law, as a constitution of South Africa, is the one that acts horizontally to make everything lawfully. So which means you cannot stop racism. The racism can stop only through constitution of South Africa or a constitution of a country like a charter, freedom charter and everything, or a UN charter.
Good morning, Cathy. Cathy, South Africa is good morning, Cathy. Sorry, I beg your pardon. And your guest. Cathy, South Africa is blessed with various cultures. So I ask myself that question. Where is the culture of humanity? Where is the rainbow nation? Racism is not allowed in the workplace or any schools in SA. Cathy, problematic is that African history was undocumented. Racism is still continuing. If the senior citizens are not unite and rewrite the history of our country from Africa perspective, local writer must be appointed to document the event. This is the major contribution senior citizen can make. Thank you very much, Cathy. Major in Bloom.
Morning, us, Cathy, and all the listeners. Going back to Andy's question, what's wrong with Africa? I think Tambeki put it well when he had an engagement last week at UNISA, that unfortunately, with all the gain we had with our freedoms since 1960, with all the African countries, Ghana going back until today to Senegal, was in Senegal now, he put it well that there's a third force behind this. He thought in our country dealing with Buramach is going to remove all that when they arrested all those, but yeah, it is deepening. And he said that you must think twice because these elections are not going to solve our problems. So this third force is really doing its work and it's going to take us all back if we're not all aware as Africans how to take our country forward. This is Silo from Israel.
Cathy Mohlahlana on SAFM.
Rising costs, housing prices, fuel price hikes, diminished consumer buying power. Inflation. It's a jungle out there. Who do you trust when the only certainty is uncertainty? You need an investment team who considers it all to give you the advantage. At Prescient Investment Management, we analyze more than 120 million indicators daily because the biggest returns are found in the smallest insights. Discover the future of investing at prescient.co.za. Prescient Investment Management is a registered FSP.
Sundays at 2 p.m. S3 is your home for Indian cinema. From February the 18th, sit back and relax as you enjoy a world of colorful entertainment. We guarantee you a memorable experience with the best Bollywood has to offer. Enjoy the holy festival of color with premium Indian cinema movies. Catch all the drama, adventure, comedy, and romance on Sundays, 2 p.m. exclusive to S3.
SAFM supports a litter-free South Africa. Play your part in keeping our surroundings and environment clean. SAFM, leading the conversation. SAFM values your views. Be an active citizen.
The book reading. Please note the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SAFM presents another episode of Why Men Hate Women, written by Kopano Ratili.
It is prudent to acknowledge that even if you think you have cognitively figured love out, maybe feel assured that you could speak at length about its true nature if you were asked to give a lecture on love, it is a problem of a different order when it comes to a real-life situation. It is not always advisable to take humans at their word because while one may be well read on